Hey everyone, it's Coach Logan here, starting a new series on the Caro-Kann from the white side. This is an opening I actually have a bit of history with. It was the first serious defense I played as black as a 2000 level player and higher, so I have some knowledge of it on the black side, and since I played it from that side, I kind of know which lines are annoying when white plays it, and that's what I wanted to look at today. So the main system I'm going to be recommending is something called the two knights attack, and just to show you how that starts, if white after the moves e4, Caro-Kann starts with c6 from black. Pretty much no matter what you play on the next move, black is going to play d5. So the system I like starts with knight c3, and then after d5, you're going to play knight f3. And you can see on the screen why they call it the two knights. This is a bit of an interesting system because I think to really understand this, you have to first be a little bit familiar with the main line. So I'm going to deviate for 1 second just to kind of show you how that goes, and then you can see why I like this system. So the main line is where white plays pawn to d4, which is a little bit more natural. White's just grabbing the center. And then after the move pawn to d5, white then plays knight to c3, defending his e4 pawn. Now, black sort of is in a bit of a difficult spot because they really want to play the move pawn to e6, something like this. But they don't want to bury this bishop here. This would basically just be a worse version of the French defense. They will have had sort of the same problems you have with this bishop, and they will have wasted a move on pawn to c6 rather than just pawn c5 in one move. So black, as I said, black wants to develop this bishop. However, he doesn't really have a good square for it right now. He can't go to f5 because of your pawn. He can't go to g4 because of your queen. And going to d7 does nothing because he'll be blocked by the pawn on e6 all the same. So what black usually plays here is he takes the pawn on e4, and then white grabs back with the knight, obviously, and now black will take the chance to play bishop f5, attacking your knight, after which the knight retreats to g3, attacking the bishop. Bishop retreats to g6. Then white plays this sort of provocative-looking move, pawn to h4, which carries with it a not-so-subtle threat of playing pawn to h5 and trapping the bishop. So black creates a little luft, and this reaches the key point that I wanted to make, which is that if white could now, if you could imagine the move, this knight on g1 going straight to e5, I know that's not a legal move, but if you could imagine that, black would actually be in significant trouble. However, white cannot do that in one move, so whenever white at this point plays knight to f3, almost reflexively, black is always just going to meet it with knight to d7, and these positions tend to be more or less equal. And some players like the white side a little bit, some like the black side, but I think objectively and in practice, these have shown to be about equal. So, but the point was I want you to remember this position in your mind. So sort of just like burn that in your mind. And I'm going to go back and now show you why I like the system that I play, the two knights. So if you recall, my recommendation after e4, c6, instead of playing pawn to d4, you're going to play knight to c3. Okay? And you can remember because the name of the opening tells you what you're doing. It's the two knights. So you develop knight to c3, and then after pawn to d5, you're going to play knight to f3. Now, black has a host of reasonable moves here, but what I've seen happen a lot of times, and this is one fun reason I like this line, is if you are playing against somebody, let's say they're like an 1100, a 1200, 1300-ish type of player who has played the Caro-Kann a lot from the black side and sort of only seen the main lines, they will have learned the sequence of ideas that you do, and a lot of times you'll just get them on autopilot doing the same thing. So I've seen strong players walk right into this. So what they'll do is they'll play this just as they did in the main line, where they take on e4, you take the pawn. They play, if you remember in the main line, they play bishop f5. Your knight makes this retreat, which also attacks their bishop. bishop returns to g6, and we reach a position like what I said before, where after white plays h4, he's threatening to trap the bishop with pawn to h5, so black makes a luft. And we reach a very, very similar position to the one we had before, except with a crucial difference. I'll give you a second to spot what the difference is. If you remember the position we had before, what is the difference here? Yeah, that's right. In the other position, you had a pawn on d4, and this knight was actually back on g1. Okay, now instead we have the knight on f3 and the pawn is back on d2. This is a hugely improved version for white, and you might not totally realize that yet, but let me show you why. So the key point with your knight being developed already is you can now play this very powerful move, knight to e5. Now, black really does not want to let you take this bishop and cripple his pawn structure. You know, for instance, something like knight f6, this would just be a disaster. This pawn is weak, black's king is weak, his pawn structure is bad, he's given you a bishop pair, he's got weak light squares, it's just too many problems. So what black will do after you play knight to e5 is they're going to retreat this bishop into this luft, and again, if white were to just play a move like something nonchalant like pawn to d4 here, black could get away with this. Black could play e6 or just something natural and be fine. The problem he's facing is white has a very powerful move here that if you didn't know this, it would maybe be tough to come up with this over the board, but I'm going to show it to you. So white just plays the move queen to h5. Not such a subtle threat, threatening to take on f7, of course, and deliver checkmate, but at the same time, it's not such an easy threat to deal with. For instance, if black were to try something like queen to d5, white has this very nasty skewer here, bishop c4, which will just pretty much win the pawn on f7 and the game. Note your queen is defending your knight on e5. So black is more or less forced to play the move pawn to g6, which strategically is horrible because it's blocking this bishop. Oops, sorry about that. It's blocking this bishop, and yeah. So now he is attacking your queen, but now you get to do my favorite move in the sequence. I'll give you a second to see if you can figure out what it is. Yes, my favorite move. Don't retreat, just develop a new piece. And okay, I think if you are playing like a 12 or 1300, they're going to figure out something's up your sleeve here. I don't think they're just going to take your queen and blunder into this pretty checkmate. Instead, they'll probably come up with more or less the only move, pawn to e6, which defends f7 and the mating threat. However, now you're going to retreat your queen to e2. Students always tell me that they want to go to f3 instead, but to the square, but I actually think e2 is better. And now it's just extremely difficult to play this position as black. White has developed 4 pieces. Black really only has developed 1, this bishop, and now he's blocked it with this pawn on g6. And the other thing is almost any sort of natural move black might make in this position just loses on the spot. For instance, I was once playing a blitz game with a 1500 former student of mine, and I think in this position he played knight d7 trying to challenge the knight, which looks very natural, but white has a crushing tactic here. I'll give you 3 seconds to find it. 3, 2, 1. Yeah, knight takes f7. That pretty much ends it. Forking the queen and the rook, king takes, and now e6 falls, and you get this pretty checkmate. Note that would also be the case if they played, like I said, any other logical move. Bishop g7 walks right into it as well. Same story. I don't know. Knight f6. I think you can also play knight takes f7, and you're getting some checkmating tricks. So yeah. Okay, so that's an introduction to this system. Now there's a lot more to cover, but I think that gives you a sense right off the bat of what kind of extra possibilities you could have when you choose rapid development with your pieces. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the main line for white where he plays d4 and plays after d5 plays knight c3. But sometimes I like things that are both not the most common, so that you might have the element of surprise on your side, but are also fundamentally sound. White is doing nothing wrong here. He's developing pieces quickly, which is what you should do. And yeah, and it opens up some nasty possibilities if your opponent isn't well prepared. So we'll jump to some of the more main lines in the next video.